Alright, so last week we did the independence of Mozambique. We did the colonial war for the Portuguese from the early 1960s to 1974. After the Carnation Revolution, we also did the geopolitical Cold War and also regional tensions with white minority governments and a fascist regime that was obviously dissolved after the Carnation Revolution. We also did the internal politics of Mozambique at that point, especially with the ethnicities of Mozambique, the ideological intelligentsia of Mozambique, and of course the rural population disenfranchised and disillusioned with Frelimo. But today we're not going to be doing politics, we're going to be doing pew, pew, pew. So let's get right into it. We're going to start with the outbreak of the Civil War and where these factions start to pop up. So we're going to look at some factions, and we're going to look and see how they popped up. So, outbreak time. From 1975 to 1977, Rhodesian troops and forces repeatedly entered into Mozambique in order to carry out operations against supported ZANLA, or Zimbabwe African National Liberation Army bases and troops, tolerated on Mozambican territory by the Frelimo government, and to destabilize the Frelimo government directly as a whole. This included the bombing of the Beria ports in 1979 and the occupation of the town of Mepi or Mapi in 1977. Now, during one such raid, Rhodesian forces freed Frelimo ex-official Andre Masagasia from a re-education camp. He was given military and organizational training and installed as the leader of the fledgling and the fleeting movement known as the Mozambican or Mozambique Resistance, which was to be founded by the Rhodesian Secret Service before the independence of Mozambique in 1975, as an intelligence gathering group on Frelimo and ZANLA, respectively. It was created in Salisbury, Rhodesia under the auspices of Ken Flowers, head of the Rhodesia COI or Central Intelligence Organization or Office, I believe, and Orlando Cristina, a former anti-guerrilla operative in the Portuguese camp. Renimo subsequently started operating in the Godongosua region in order to destabilize the Frelimo government and its support on the ZANLA movement against Rhodesia as a whole. Renimo was comprised of several anti-communist dissident groups which appeared immediately prior to and shortly following Mozambican independence in 1975. Now, Renimo's ranks included a number of Mozambican political exiles opposed to Frelimo on principle, whether it be race, religion, or creed or ideology, including Frelimo's defectors disillusioned with the Marxist-Leninist ideology of Samora Machel. In 1979, Matsangasia died in Renimo's unsuccessful first attack on a major regional center, Vila Pava, and Renimo was quickly ousted from the region. Subsequently, Afonso Dhlakama became the new leader of Renimo, and with extensive South African support, it quickly organized itself into an effective guerrilla army against Frelimo. Other rebel groups initially independent of Renimo also fought the Frelimo government. The Revolutionary Party of Mozambique, or the Partido Revolucionario de Mozambique, or the PRM, founded by Amos Sumain from 1974 or in 1976. Really depends on where you look at. Waged the low-level insurgency in the northern provinces of the Zambezia, the Titi or the Nisa in 1977 and from 1977. Sumain was captured in 1980 and executed by the Mozambican government in 1981. The PRM merged with Renimo in 1982. In 1987, Guillermo Padilla, who had succeeded Sumain in 1980 and later became a senior figure in Renimo, created a splinter group called Unimo, which briefly fought both the Renimo and Frelimo armies before permanently joining the government side in 1988. Other rebel factions during the conflict included Conomo, Unipomo, and Fumo. And these are all acronyms for various ideological splinters of Frelimo. Yes. And yes, everybody has Mozambique in the title. Now, Renimo's strategies and operation. How does a guerrilla fight a guerrilla that is now a government? Now, Renimo's strategies and operations. How does a guerrilla fight a guerrilla that is now in charge of the Ministry of Education? How does one do that? No. Having fought the Portuguese using guerrilla strategies, Frelimo was now forced to defend itself against the very same methods and strategies it had employed against the colonial regime of the Portuguese. It had to defend vast areas and hundreds of locations, while Renimo operated out of a few remote camps, carrying out raids against towns and important infrastructure in the region. Furthermore, Renimo systematically forced civilians into its employment, which it had done by mass abductions and intimidation, especially of children, in order to use them as, well, child soldiers. It is estimated that 1/3 of Renimo's forces were actually child soldiers, abducted people who had also served Renimo in administrative or public service functions in the areas it had controlled as well. Another way of using civilians for military purposes was the so-called system of Gandira. This system especially affected the rural population in areas controlled by Renimo, forcing them to fulfill 3 main tasks. Number 1, produce the food for the Renimo. Number 2, transport goods and ammunition for Renimo. And 3, in the case of women, were to be served as sex slaves or concubines for Renimo. Renimo's stated goal was to free Mozambique from Michelist communism. Renimo's political program centered around the abandonment of Frelimo's socialist policies, the adoption of a free market economy, and more traditional concerns about the reinstatement of tribal leaders or positions of authority within Mozambique. Thus, despite its far superior numbers, Frelimo was unable to adequately defend most regions except the most important cities or the most biggest cities like Beira and Maputo by the mid-1980s. Renimo was able to carry out raids virtually anywhere in the country except for the major cities, like I said, Maputo, Beira, Maipi, stuff like that. Transportation had become a perilous business. From Maputo to Beira, you could lose a limb, quite literally. Even armed convoys were not safe from Renimo's attacks and were frequently attacked. Now, you're the government. You were once guerrillas. How do you strategize against what you once were? Frelimo's strategies and their operations. Frelimo reacted by renewing a system similar to the fortified village or the aldimento system introduced by the Portuguese. The creation of the fortified communal villages called the aldimentos comunitas, or the fortified community, which much of the rural population was relocated to as the war intensified. Furthermore, in order to keep a minimal level of infrastructure working, 3 heavily guarded and mine corridors were established consisting of roads, railways, and power lines. The Bidia, the TT, also called the TT Run, which speaks for itself regarding the safety or lack thereof, and the Limpopo corridor, all connecting to Maputo. Despite extensive fortifications along these corridors, they were frequently subject to attacks. Bombings of the railway line and locomotives along the Beira corridor cost the Frelimo government millions, as it struggled to provide adequate food and services and put a strain on its ally, Zimbabwe. Alright, now, this can't be the Cold War without a proxy war, and even though Mozambique is one of those low-level things, you could bet your bottom dollar that the Soviet Union and the US would find a way to get in here. But also, what's funny is that South Africa and China would also find a way. So let's see what's going on. Now, Frelimo initially received substantial military and development aid from the Soviet Union and East Germany, but later received support from France, the United Kingdom, and the United States of America. Now, in the US, conservative circles lobbied for the US government to provide open support to Renimo, but were opposed by the State Department, which finally gained the upper hand following the publication of numerous detailed reports which document Renimo's brutality, especially on civilians. Now, Renimo receives extensive military and logistical support from Rhodesia before they became Zimbabwe and South Africa, as well as organizational support from West Germany, from Bund, In 1982, landlocked Zimbabwe directly intervened in the civil war in order to secure its vital transport routes in Mozambique, stop cross-border Renimo raids, and to help its sole ally, Frelimo. Zimbabwe's help became crucial in the defense of the corridors, particularly the important Bedia corridor with the access to the sea. Later, Zimbabwe became engaged further, carrying out several joint operations with Frelimo against Renimo strongholds, including the capture of the Renimo base camp and the original place where Renimo was, in the Gorosuga region. Now, Tanzania also sent troops to back Frelimo because they were a socialist-aligned, Narili style, not really communist, but very Pan-Africanist socialist group. Now, there are three interesting ones though. North Korea, East Germany, and the Soviet Union also armed and trained Frelimo forces, with the North Koreans establishing a military mission in Mozambique during the early 1980s. North Korean advisors were instrumental in the formation of Frelimo's first specialized counterinsurgency brigade, which was developed from 1983 onwards. East Germany also provided military assistance and trained members of the Mozambican FPLM in East Germany, which was pretty much the police, not really like a secret police, but kind of like a Grande Demi, but kind of secret police. Now, another interesting one, we gotta go back to one these days, but in the spring of 1977, the Romanian Socialist Army sent 500 soldiers and officers to Mozambique. The Romanians were deployed to Maputo and Nacala, specializing in operating tanks and obviously specializing in anti-tank warfare, but for the purposes of this video, Frelimo was the one who had the tanks, right? These Romanian troops, under the supervision of some Soviet officers, trained the Mozambican tank troops to use the T-34, the legendary T-34, and the more iconic but more, Hungarian Revolution, Prague Spring crushing T-54. Now, another interesting country, Malawi. Malawi had a complicated relationship with both Frelimo and Renimo. During the mid-1980s, Frelimo reportedly accused Malawian President Hastings Banda of providing sanctuary to Renimo insurgents. Mozambican security forces occasionally carried out raids into Malawi to strike at a suspected Renimo base, a practice which brought them into direct conflict with the Malawian Defense Force, or the MDF. In 1986, Malawi, under Mozambican pressure, expelled 12,000 Renimo insurgents. Banda explicitly turned against Renimo after disgruntled Renimo insurgents began targeting a vital rail line which linked Blantyre to Mozambican ports on the Indian Oceans. Beginning in April 1987, the Malawian government deployed troops into Mozambique to defend this vital rail line, which they became involved in a number of military engagements with Renimo and, well, obviously against Renimo. Now, the last big player that saw it all the way to the end. I think, it was coming, I believe, it was coming, but I don't think you can guess who is the next one. But I think you can, but let me drop a hint for you. After 1980, South Africa became Renimo's main supporter. The Frelimo government, led by President Michel, was economically devastated by the war and sought to end the conflict and continue the development of Mozambique. Even the military and diplomatic support with the socialist bloc could not alleviate the nation's economic misery and the famine as a result of the war, because this is the 1980s, so communism and socialism are kind of winding down. After negotiations, a reluctant Michel signed a non-aggression pact with South Africa, known as the Nkomati Accords, or the Nkomati Accord. In return, Pretoria promised to stop assistance to Renimo in exchange for Frelimo's commitment to prevent the ANC from losing Mozambique as a sanctuary to pursue its campaign to end white minority rule in South Africa, following a May 1983 car bombing in Pretoria by the ANC. South Africa bombed the capital, declaring they had killed 41 ANC members. With the economy in shambles, Michel was forced to scale back some of his more ambitious socialist policies. In a visit to Western Europe that same month, Michel signed a military and economic agreement with, agreements with Portugal, France, and the United Kingdom. Collective and state agricultural programs were also scaled back, prompting concerns from the socialist bloc that Mozambique was moving towards capitalism. The volume of the South African government's support for Renimo reduced after the Nkomati Accords, but documents discovered during the capture of Renimo's headquarters at the Gorosunga in central Mozambique in August 1985 revealed that the South Africans had actually continued and even extended its already extensive logistical, communicational, and military support for Renimo. Frelimo now, meanwhile, honored its side of the deal to expel militant ANC members from its territory and to downgrade the ANC's presence in the south of the country. The United States was not involved in this technically, logistically, but South Africanly in this conflict. You can't have a good civil war without the war grinding to a halt, because you can only kill brother and brother for so long. So we're gonna look at the military stalemate and see exactly why Frelimo and Renimo, despite their interesting strategies, obviously stalemated. By the end of the 1980s, Renimo, whilst incapable of capturing or securing any large cities, was still able to move freely in rural areas and attack smaller settlements. Frelimo retained control of larger urban areas and the corridors, but were unable to effectively protect the countryside from Renimo attacks. Frelimo was unable to pin down Renimo and force it into a direct conventional war, while Renimo was unable to really run free beyond the deserts and the grasslands of the countryside. On the 19th of October 1986, President Michel died after his presidential aircraft crashed near South Africa and the South African border under disputed circumstances. A South African-sponsored investigation concluded that the crash was caused by errors made by the flight crew, a conclusion that was not universally accepted because, South Africa was like, yeah, we checked ourselves out, we're not the bad guys, right? Subsequent investigations have failed to reach the same conclusion, and the accident remains surrounded by conspiracy and Cold War paranoia, claiming that the South Africans were responsible for the crash, whether it be a surface-to-air missile or even a jet. Despite how he died, he still did unfortunately die, and Michel's successor was Joaquim Alberto Chissano, who has served as the foreign minister from 1975 until Michel's death in 1986. Chissano continued Michel's policies of expanding Mozambique's international ties, particularly the country's links with the West, and enacted economic and even military reforms for Mozambique. During the war, hundreds of thousands of people died from famine, particularly during the devastating famine of 1984. Literally Orwellian 1984. But seriously, the famine was caused by adverse weather conditions, especially a hot summer of 1984, and was significantly worsened by the conflict between Renimo and Frelimo. Now, it was whether because somebody was abducted to be a child soldier, or somebody abducted or forcibly moved to Aldementos Comunas, or somebody that was shooting at a tank from a helicopter, or somebody that was rolling over a field of grain in a T-54, or somebody that fired an RPG at that same tank, or somebody that probably conscripted a child that usually collects that grain for their mother and their father, or somebody had their limb blown off, their hand blown off. Whatever the case, the famine did devastate them, just like Ethiopia and just like in Angola. But with that being said, this is a war that has so far ravaged South Africa, brought many nations, some that I've low-key kind of forgot. Romania, I'm looking at you. And also brought into this world death, famine, and destruction, from the Eastern Bloc to the US and the Western Bloc. I'm surprised that the US was on the Mozambican side, but State Department did have the State Department's way, so it's cool. But with that being said, I hope you enjoyed. I hope you learned something. I hope this was another fascinating episode of the Cold War in Mozambique, the Mozambican Civil War, or simply the war that devastated Mozambique from 1977 to 1992. But anyway, hope you enjoyed, hope you learned something. So we start from Renimo's foundation. We go up, we see how they fight. We go up, we see who backed them. And then we go and see why they stalemated and how the war is now starting to come to an end. Because don't forget, we're literally in the late 1980s now. So by the time we do the other two, we're going to be pretty much at 1992. I do believe War Crimes is going to be a little more quicker. It does seem a little bit more quicker, probably like a special episode, if you will, but that's still going to be a part. And then obviously the aftermath with the signing of the 1992 Accords. But let me not spoil it for you though. You have to wait till next week. Black History Month still has a week left, I believe, so I might gotta do some due diligence and do some back-to-back work though. But for now, you get the course of the war from 1977 to the late 1980s. I hope you enjoyed. I hope you learned something. And until next time, 50 minutes. Probably getting 15 to 20 minutes out of this again, but I love it all the same because I don't re-record because I messed up. Sometimes I re-record because I know I could do better all the time. Anyway, learn something. Hope you enjoyed. And until next time, I'll see you in Maputo to sign those peace accords after we do the war crime little episode thing. Anyway, bye-bye.